A console's launch titles, that is to say, the games that release alongside the system, play a huge part in the console's success or failure. After all, people buy a console to play games on it, not just to sit and look at it under their television. So, today I want to explore how Nintendo chooses which games to launch their consoles with, specifically by examining the launch titles from the original Switch. We'll read interviews from developers and examine how the strategies used to select the Switch's launch lineup can be applied to the Switch 2's launch games as well. Let's talk about how Nintendo chooses its launch titles. So, the Nintendo Switch had 3 first-party launch games: Breath of the Wild, 1-2-Switch, and Snipperclips, alongside a handful of games from other studios. We'll put those aside for now to focus on the 3 games that Nintendo themselves had a major hand in. Each of those 3 games can be put into a different category, starting with 1-2-Switch. 1. The Tech Showcase. So, 1-2-Switch got its start within Nintendo's EPD Production Group 4, the team responsible for more experimental titles like Nintendo Labo, Ring Fit Adventure, Switch Sports, and most recently, Alamo. According to Yoshiaki Koizumi, the man in charge of the entire Nintendo Switch launch, 1-2-Switch is the type of game that's really suited towards being an icebreaker with groups of people. It's something that anyone can pick up and play. The original concept for Nintendo Switch was trying to come up with these ideas for play which offer anybody the chance to play these games wherever they want. And that was really the genesis of the idea for Nintendo Switch. 1-2-Switch is entirely built around the Nintendo Switch console, demonstrating the flexibility of the system and its built-in controllers. It retailed for £50 or $60 and was clearly considered by Nintendo to be a major part of the Switch's launch strategy. But, serendipitously, there was another, smaller scale launch title which also demonstrated the power of the Joy-Cons. 2. The third-party collab. So, I have to admit a huge bias for Snipperclips, which I think is a true forgotten gem. Unlike the other 2 Switch launch titles, Snipperclips didn't get its start within Nintendo, but rather from a pair of British brothers, Tom and Adam Vian. The Vian brothers, who started small indie studio SFB Games, are responsible for titles like Haunt the House, Detective Grimoire and its sequel Tangle Tower, and recent indie horror adventure Crow Country. During a 2015 game jam, the duo created Friend Shapes, a demo for a co-op puzzle game where players cut shapes out of each other. Here's how this early demo looked. Feeling that Friend Shapes would make a good fit for a Nintendo console, the Vian brothers reached out to a contact at Nintendo, and the publisher agreed that the game had a lot of potential. And so, a partnership began between SFB Games and Nintendo of America, specifically Nintendo Software Technology, who are best known for Mario vs. Donkey Kong and more recently, F-Zero 99. Tom and Adam Vian's demo was renamed to Snipperclips, and work began in collaboration with the 2 studios to polish up and expand the demo into a full-fledged game. The reason I bring all of that up is to say that Snipperclips was never planned as a Nintendo Switch launch title. For the first half year of development, SFB Games didn't know whether the game would be released on Wii U, Nintendo's current console at the time, or the much-rumoured NX, aka what would become the Switch. Then, midway through 2016, Tom and Adam Vian were invited to Nintendo of America's US headquarters to see this Switch console, which at the time was a big secret. According to Adam Vian, we secretly hoped that if the project went well, there might be a chance that we would be able to make it for the Nintendo Switch. And sure enough, when Nintendo gave their major Nintendo Switch presentation at the start of 2017, one of the games showed off was Snipperclips. When the Switch was released in March, Snipperclips wasn't available as a physical title, but instead as a lower-priced, digital-only download. It was one of the first games on the Nintendo eShop, in fact. Snipperclips was clearly not part of the Nintendo Switch's original launch strategy. But, though it was smaller in scope, cheaper in price, and developed without much involvement at all from Nintendo's main Japanese team, I would argue that Snipperclips demonstrated the utility of the Joy-Cons far better than 1-2 Switch. And it was all down to good timing. But this download title wasn't the only game that didn't get its start as a launch title for the Switch. 3. The Blockbuster. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is one of Nintendo's most important games ever. Without Zelda at launch, who knows how successful the Switch might have been. I could make a whole video about the long and complicated development history of the game, but I want to focus on how it came to be a Switch launch title. So, Breath of the Wild entered early development right after the completion of Skyward Sword in 2011, with the idea of an interconnected, open Zelda game for the Wii U. It was only thanks to the increase in processing power from Wii to Wii U that an open-world Zelda game would even be possible. 3 years later, the Zelda team had made great progress on their game, with Zelda series producer Eiji Aonuma showing off an early prototype at the Game Awards 2014. But the more the project progressed, the greater Aonuma and his team's ambitions grew. Although Nintendo had initially announced a release year of 2015, this was eventually delayed into 2016, and then again into 2017. And it was in spring 2016, with Nintendo's next console, the Switch, looming on the horizon, that it was decided to have the game release on both the Wii U and the Switch simultaneously. Aonuma said in an interview, "When we decided we'd also develop the game for Nintendo Switch, we knew in a way we would be placing a large extra burden on the development team. And I knew some would complain about it, as they'd been developing it for Wii U and they'd have to make some changes. But I really led that process myself. I really thought myself about how we could make that title work on Nintendo Switch, and had to sell the idea to the development team in a way." Those changes largely consisted of changes to the control scheme. Originally, the development team had made use of the Wii U's second screen for many controls and buttons, as can be seen in the 2014 prototype. But the Switch's single screen meant that these second screen controls all had to be moved onto the main screen instead. That could have been a catastrophic change to the way that Breath of the Wild played. But after prototyping these single-screen controls, the team found they actually preferred not having to keep switching focus between two screens. And the Switch control scheme was brought over to the Wii U version as well. As for whether the game would be ready for the Switch's launch, Aonuma said, "As soon as the development of the Nintendo Switch version became a reality, we knew we would be releasing it at the launch of the Nintendo Switch. So that deadline was something we knew about from a while ago, and knew that we'd be able to hit." Aonuma joked that as his boss was none other than Yoshiaki Koizumi, the man in charge of the Switch's launch, he had no choice but to hit the release date. So, as you can see, all three of Nintendo's first-party Switch launch titles had different paths to becoming a launch title. 1-2 Switch was a game built around the console in order to show off some of its unique features. Snipperclips was a game being worked on outside the company, but was so perfect for the Switch that Nintendo had no choice but to scoop it up as a launch game. And Breath of the Wild entered development long before the Switch even existed, but as the game was delayed again and again, bringing Zelda to the Switch in time for the console's launch felt almost like a foregone conclusion. So now, let us compare those 3 games to the Switch 2's launch lineup to see how those development stories can be applied. First, we have Mario Kart World, which very much fits into the blockbuster category alongside Breath of the Wild. But while Breath of the Wild wasn't originally developed with the Switch in mind, I think it's pretty clear that Mario Kart World is a little different. Nintendo has never released multiple mainline Mario Kart titles on a single system, and the huge scope and increased graphical fidelity of Mario Kart World both strongly suggest the title entered development with the Switch 2's specs in mind. Then we have Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, which fits neatly into the tech showcase category. Like 1-2 Switch before it, the title was clearly developed as a showcase for the new features of the Switch 2 console. In fact, Welcome Tour directly tells players about new features using text boxes and tech demos. And then finally, we have our third category, third-party collab. This time round, there's no third-party collab a la Snipperclips, although what we do have are many major third-party ports, including Cyberpunk 2077 and Street Fighter 6. But with the Switch 2, a new category emerges, that being Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games, that is to say, beefed up versions of original Switch titles. At launch are both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom Switch 2 editions, which serve as showcases of the Switch 2's improved technical ability. So, like the Switch 1 before it, I think at launch, Nintendo are really relying on a single major blockbuster title to convince prospective customers to buy themselves a Switch 2. Last time it was Breath of the Wild, this time it's Mario Kart World. But I think the key takeaway of examining the path from development to launch title of Breath of the Wild, 1-2 Switch and Snipperclips is that the games available at launch on any given console are not always part of some grand plan set in motion years in advance, but rather they are often products of happenstance, of being in the right place at the right time. But when that happenstance gives you Zelda Breath of the Wild, you can consider yourself very lucky indeed. Hey, thanks for watching, and a big thanks to my patrons for supporting videos like this one. In particular, thank you to Aaron and Catherine, Brett and Eric, Candy Crystal, Cyprian Eov, The Real Procyon, Daryl Gero, Ellie Birnbaum, Elise Rose Barsness, Eliza the Doe, Jim Gilsonan, Kieran Chan, Kelly Wright, Lucas Little, Michael Gunter, Preston Kurth, Skator Pie, Thomas Söderlund, and Tlazot Lalia.